Welcome to the HR diagram. The HR diagram is named after Hertzsprung and Russell, two different people who discovered this relationship separately. And both of them were plotting temperature on the horizontal axis. So that's what we have as temperature. I'll write a capital T down here. And temperature actually increases to the left on this figure. So hotter stars will be to the left, cooler stars will be to the right. And luminosity is usually what's plotted here on the vertical axis. And luminosity will increase. More powerful stars are towards the top. If instead of labeling it as temperature increasing to the left, you could have also labeled it with the spectral types, and then it would go left to right. Oh, be a fine guy, kiss me. So it turns out where you land on this diagram is going to actually tell us something. Is your star stable? Is your star burning hydrogen? How much time does your star have left before it, quote unquote, dies? So, depending on the mass of a star, it's going to have a certain luminosity, which also is going to mean it has a certain surface temperature. So stars cannot just have a random luminosity with a random temperature. They're linked together, which means that you only have certain groups on the HR diagram. There's four main groups. Right? Let's just list them off right now. You've got white dwarfs here on the lower left. The main sequence is diagonal, top left to lower right. Supergiants just kind of hang out along the top here. And giants. So those are the four groups. The main sequence stars are actually the stable group here. Main sequence stars are stable. They're burning hydrogen and helium in their cores. Our sun is on the main sequence here. See, it's one dot on the main sequence. It has a spectral type G, a certain surface temperature, and a certain luminosity. It is one single dot on here. Giants happen to be low mass stars that are running out of fuel. So they're about to run out of fuel, and let's draw a frowny face. Right. Supergiants are high mass stars that are running out of fuel. Frowny face. White dwarfs are basically low mass stars that have died. These are the leftover cores of the low mass stars. Right. So they're not technically stars anymore. They don't have any fusion. Let's talk about the main sequence a little bit more, because I would consider that the most important grouping here. When a star is burning hydrogen into helium, right, that's its most efficient fuel, and it stays stable for a very long time. So the sun is going to stay here on the main sequence until it starts becoming unstable. The main sequence also acts like a big sorting machine. Right? It sorts it from blue to red, high mass down to low mass, sorts it by luminosity, most powerful to least powerful, sorts it by color. It also sorts it by lifetime. High mass stars burn through their fuel very quickly, so they have short lifetime, and it goes down to the low mass stars, which burn their fuel very slowly and have a very long lifetime. Right? Clusters of stars are stars that are bound together by gravity, and it turns out that they had to pretty much form that way. Right? So all of these stars are orbiting around each other, and they move around the galaxy as a group. For all of the stars in the cluster, since they have formed together, you can say that they have pretty much the same age, and also pretty much the same distance from Earth. In our galaxy, there are two main types of star clusters. Globular clusters, and here's what a globular cluster looks like, and open clusters, and here's a picture of an open cluster. globular clusters tend to be really, really old. The stars in a globular cluster formed while the galaxy was forming. So these are old stars. Globular clusters tend to have 1,000,000 stars or more, and roughly would look reddish to your eye. They mostly are filled with low mass stars. Open clusters are pretty much the opposite. Open clusters are young. They're freshly formed stars, just formed from a nebula. They might only have 1,000 stars, maybe 2,000 stars, and to your eye, they would look bluish. So now let's talk about why they look so different, why one is blue, why one is red. All right. So let's say we start off with an open cluster. An open cluster forms all the different masses of stars. So your open cluster forms with some massive blue stars, some intermediate yellow stars, and tiny little red stars. And you let time take its toll, and the high mass stars die out first. They burn through their fuel and they disappear from your field of view. So as a cluster ages, all that you can see is the low mass or intermediate mass stars that are left. So when the cluster is young, you can see all the different colors of stars, blue, white, yellow, and red. But the blue stars are going to be the most obvious. They're the most powerful stars in that cluster, so that's what you see. You see the bluish tint. So this could be an open cluster. Young stars, they're still hot, bright blue stars. Once the cluster ages, all you have are the low mass and intermediate mass stars. So this might be a globular cluster right here. And this cluster would look a little bit more red because all the blue stars have died off. They used to be there, but they've died off. So now let's look at the same thing, but on an HR diagram. So let's start off with an open cluster. An open cluster would form stars of all masses, and it would populate this main sequence here. You'd form some high mass stars on the main sequence, some intermediate mass stars on the main sequence, and this should be the most populated right down here, oodles and oodles and oodles of low mass stars. With time, the high mass stars age and disappear. Right? They'll move on the HR diagram, they'll become supergiants, and then eventually they'll go supernova and disappear. And so do you see with time, the main sequence gets shorter. So what we actually do is we look for what we call the turnoff point. So here the turnoff point, the most luminous star left on the main sequence, is the next one to die. And so we can figure out, well, what was the lifetime of that star? Right? That's going to tell us the age of the cluster. Our sun is roughly about here in this cluster, and it has a lifetime of about 10 million years. And if a star like our sun is the next one to die, that means that this cluster is also 10 billion years old. The main sequence turnoff tells us the age of the cluster. The older the cluster, the shorter the main sequence. So the HR diagram can help tell you what you're looking at. If you take a population of stars and you put them on the HR diagram, one dot for each star, and you get some white dwarfs, some giants, some supergiants, and some main sequence stars of all the masses, I would say you're going to be looking at random stars of different ages, because otherwise you can't have some low mass stars that are dying as well as some freshly formed high mass stars. So this might represent a whole galaxy. When you look at a cluster of stars, and because it's a cluster we think it all had to form at the same time, all these stars would have the same age. And in this case, it has a long main sequence. So I would say that we are looking at a young cluster of stars, which we would call an open cluster. If you look at a cluster of stars and you plot all of the stars on the HR diagram, and you end up with only a stubby little main sequence, this diagonal part right here. I'm going to say that that's an old cluster, and an old cluster is a globular cluster. As the stars leave the main sequence and go off to become supergiants or go off to become giants, you can get some interesting patterns that happen up in here. But we're not really worried about that right now. We're looking at the length of the main sequence, this diagonal part right here. So the HR diagram helps tell you what you're looking at in the galaxy.